European leaders have warned against Ukrainian borders being redrawn by force 2 days before a US-Russia summit on Ukraine is due to take place in Alaska. In a statement, European leaders, excluding Hungary, said the people of Ukraine must have the freedom to decide their future, adding that the principles of territorial integrity must be respected and international borders must not be changed by force. Well, President Zelenskyy, who's not been invited to the summit on Friday, posted a warning today that Russia is playing for time. The Russian army is not preparing to end the war. On the contrary, he said, they are making movements that indicate preparations for a new offensive operation. Well, in a BBC interview, the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, said any peace deal for Ukraine that didn't involve that country simply wouldn't be implemented.
Well, it's clear that Putin just wants to talk to President Trump and go for the old-fashioned way of, let's divide the territories and spheres of influence. But it's clear that it doesn't work that way because Ukraine has been very clear, Europe has been very clear that we can't agree to anything that Ukraine doesn't agree to. So if Ukraine is not of the deal, any deal will just not be implemented, and that is the reason why Ukraine needs to be around that table.
You've got another meeting Wednesday with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Zelenskyy. You want to be consulted on what goes forward. What are you going to say to him? What are you going to ask for?
Well, we have also leaders level statements coming out. We had the discussion on the foreign ministers level today. We were very united in, of course, wanting peace, also unconditional ceasefire for any negotiations to start. And then also that the concessions need to be made on the Russian side, who hasn't done any concessions whatsoever. I just remind you that Ukraine agreed to unconditional ceasefire 5 months ago, and Russia is just stalling. Russia just wants to postpone the secondary sanctions, that the risk was up there. President Trump was saying that if Putin is not, making any steps, then he will put the sanctions on Russia. So he wants to postpone that, and he wants to show that he's around the table like equal and others are not. But it's just that any deal to function, I repeat again, needs Ukraine's consent, because otherwise it just doesn't work.
Well, let's talk to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who's here in the studio with me. And Frank, a really clear position there from Kaja Kallas. What is not clear is how much of that Donald Trump believes.
He gives the appearance of changing his mind from 1 month to the next. I mean, he was very clear back in February that he was putting all the blame on President Zelenskyy. And remember that he hasn't sanctioned Russia so far at all. All the pressure initially was on Ukraine. Then, after that disastrous low of the Oval Office meeting and on February the 28th, when he told, do you remember, he gave a huge dressing down to Zelenskyy, saying you haven't got all the cards, etc. They then patched things up a bit in the Vatican, and then subsequently he started to appear to blame President Putin, saying he's stringing me along or tapping me along and so on. It's very hard to see which way it's going to go. But this summit, assuming it is going to go ahead, and there's no reason to think it won't, this is already a victory for President Trump in the sense that President Putin, because he is breaking out of the isolation that Europe has tried very hard to put him in, slapping sanctions on him, round after round of EU sanctions. Now there is the possibility of those sanctions on the US side being lifted, of possible trade deals between the US and Russia, and of course the real possibility that Ukraine could be sidelined in all of this.
Well, let's pick up on that final point, because we heard from the German Chancellor yesterday he was going to make sure that Zelenskyy participated in this Trump-Putin meeting. Unclear exactly how, but how significant do you think it is that the Europeans are trying, even at this late stage, to ensure there's no sort of sellout of Ukraine?
The analogy I think I would give, Matthew, it's like a train that has left the station. And on that train, you've got Trump and Putin, and the Europeans and Ukraine are left on the platform saying, hang on, wait, we're not on the train. Stop. It's a bit like that. They are I think not entirely relevant to the White House's plans here. Certainly Putin, it suits him to have Europe and Ukraine cut out of this. And Putin is a smart guy. You know, he may be wrong on some things, but he is a smart guy. He spent his early years in intelligence as a KGB officer. He went on to head Russian intelligence. He's been a consummate political maneuverist. And to some extent, I think, you know, he's possibly going to outsmart, there's a risk he's going to outsmart Trump on this.
Yes, and even Donald Trump has acknowledged in the past, in recent weeks, that perhaps he is being played by Vladimir Putin. Let's put the map on the screen for viewers and talk us through it, because Donald Trump, again, only yesterday in that news briefing at the White House, talking about land swaps. Just explain to people watching the sort of things that are being talked about. We also hear about freezing the front lines. We talk about perhaps there may be no official recognition that it is Russian territory if that's the place we end up with these negotiations. So talk people through this map.
So if this map looks familiar, it's because it is. It's because it has hardly budged, or the front lines of, in a large scale like this, they've hardly budged since late 2022. So you can see Ukraine there is the big white area in the middle. The purple or pink shaded bit are all the bits that Russia has conquered. Crimea, it took in 2014. It occupied it and then illegally annexed it. The pink bits have also been annexed by Russia, but that's not recognized by most of the world. None of this is. So what this summit is about is trying to reach some kind of some kind of agreement that possibly kicks down the road the idea of sovereignty. Because for Ukraine, this is a red line. They cannot give up sovereignty to areas that thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have died, have given their lives for to defend. That would be political suicide for President Zelenskyy, potentially. But Crimea, I think even some Ukrainians know Russia's never going to give Crimea back. You know, all Russians consider Crimea is absolutely part of their lifeblood.
And really briefly, in terms of what Ukraine may get back or hope to get back, it would be what continued long-term diplomatic pressure, even sanctions to try to sort out those territorial areas that you just referenced, and also some sort of security guarantee, perhaps the pathway to NATO membership.
Yeah, I mean, OK, the downsides, I think, of this summit are probably much bigger for Ukraine than they are for Russia. Russia isn't risking very much by having this summit. I think the most likely resolution is that there will be some talk of freezing the front line. Now, the question is, where do you freeze it? There is quite a lot of talk of Ukraine having to give up the parts of Donetsk Oblast, Donetsk province, that's in the Donbass, that it still occupies, or not occupies, it's Ukrainian land. The parts that it still is present in and is defending, giving that up to Russia. In return, there would be a ceasefire, there would be an end to the nightly bombardments of Ukrainian cities by Russian drones and missiles, and potentially Russia would have to give up some parts of the other two oblasts, Kherson and Zaporizhia. But it's not clear yet exactly what is on the table. None of this is going to have any lasting peace effect unless there are security guarantees. If they're written on paper, it means nothing. The big European message to President Trump is do not trust President Putin, because you've got to remember that just in the days running up to the full-scale invasion 3.5 years ago, Russia was telling the world, we're not going to invade. This is just Western propaganda and hyperbole. Then they invaded.
Frank Gardner, thanks for taking us through all of that. Thanks so much.